Theo in Switzerland. Theo, what is up?
Hey guys, how
Hey,
are you doing?
doing awesome. Theo, I think you're my very first call from Switzerland, which is fantastic, man. Yeah, tell me what you want to talk about.
Yeah, my topic was basically natural law philosophy.
Okay.
I'm on the Discord of ACA and having some discussions there. And I've had some quite strong, controversial discussions with other philosophers who always come with the is-ought problem. And I told them that has been solved long time by law. Both American and European law is based on natural law philosophy, based on scientific approach, based on human rights, what we want to grant everybody. And I think that's very important to, basically enforce on everybody those inalienable rights.
Yeah, so I know what you're talking about, but kind of break it down for the audience so that they kind of maybe get up to speed if they've never heard about this kind of stuff before.
And me.
Yeah, so the idea is philosophy often says you can't get an ought from an is, so you can't have facts leading to a clear normative what you should do. That's basically the core of it.
Yeah, so I guess I'm more interested in talking about like inalienable rights. Like, should we enforce human rights on everyone? Is kind of the note that I had here about this call. Which I think is a really interesting question. First of all, what is your take on that, Theo?
My take on is we should enforce minimal humanitarian international laws on everybody. That's what the European Court of Human Rights does. You can pull everybody who signed into their Charta to any violation of a human right they declare. And every nation will be forced to execute their rulings if they violate international law.
And what is, if you could, because I'm sure you have multiple reasons, but maybe give me like one big or two big reasons why you think this should be the case.
The biggest reason is so we can have an objective ethic standard we compare every law with, and we can make sure people aren't violated their really basic rights we want to grant everybody. Like, for example, Germany 1933, the Nazis killing Jews. We would feel the ought to act, the ought to intervene and to stop them, the genocide.
So you think if before 1932, like if we had some sort of international accord like we do now, as far as our humanitarian laws, that we could actually prevent that kind of particular disaster and maybe other disasters?
Exactly. That's why we founded the League of Nations, which later became the United Nations, UN.
And what do you think about, like the UN has been criticized over the years because of its inability to kind of handle certain problems and stuff. Do you think that's a result of just bureaucracy, or do you think is it something with?
I think that's exactly the angst many people have to enforce international law on everybody. They don't want to violate the autonomy of a country, but if you are in the situation of 1933 where there is genocide, you have to intervene, otherwise you're unethical by not protecting the other lives,
Interesting. David, do you have an opinion on this?
Well, hello, Theo. My first thought goes to Crimea and that sort of issue in Ukraine with Russia successfly attempting to annex it. I am by no means an expert in that particular area. I don't know if you, because you are geographically slightly closer to it than me, I don't know if you had a particular opinion on that.
Yeah, I think it's also an international human people's law that self-determination is untouchable. So every nation, every people should be able to determine their own nationality. So basically everything against democratic independence is against international humanitarian law. The problem is often the UN has too few power, or some members aren't willing to act. So they always vote if they take any action, so what has to be done.
Could I quickly follow that one up as well? While you were speaking, I immediately thought of two things. One, Kosovo, to which I'm also not an expert on that particular situation. And secondly, we just had the EU election period at the end of last month. And Italy's biggest party, I think from memory, was Lega. And they, in the past, have at least possibly now as well, advocated for North and South Italy to become two different countries. Would you support such a move?
Generally, according to international law, no government is able to split and determine what a nation is. No government is able to abandon regions. Everything must be democratically voted by the population of that place. So when the population of that place votes for independence, we have to respect it. But what they cannot vote is any law conflicting with international humanitarian law. So if they would vote on anything against that, like Nazi Germany, we would have to intervene. We would have to stop them and say, hey, if you're going in this direction, we come with our army and will protect the others.
Excellent, excellent. So democracy is kind of the foundation by which we decide the autonomy of individual nations and groups of people is kind of what you would say your standard is, right? Like as long as the region, the people of a specific region are voting. I'm trying to think of like, I mean, there's tons of different examples. Like, I mean, the Kosovo thing is one of them. You know, like Spain,
Catalonia and Spain.
Yeah, you know, like so. Wow. Okay, because you know, I have dabbled in like anarchist philosophy before, and you know, the anarchists. I mean, there's obviously wide range of texts and thoughts and theories, but you know, part of it does say like just being born into a nation and having its laws and things are things that you as a person never necessarily consented to or agreed to, right? I was born as a United States citizen and I'm subjugated to the United States law and stuff, even though I was never a part of most of the laws that were made in that process and stuff. And some would say that is a violation of my autonomy in some sense. Would you extend that to your philosophy as well? Would you say that does it go that far?
If you go close to the law, it isn't, because you would be able to self-determinate. If you have a group of people, which you could say, now we are a state, you should have the international law against every other national law that you can self-determinate and be independent as a state. You just have to obey the international humanitarian laws. That's the golden frame we set for every nation. Basically.
Yeah. Okay. So it kind of falls back to that international accord that you're talking about, right? Yeah. Oh, man, I don't know. I think I would have a tendency to agree. I would say personally, it seems that the most amount of work and protections get done when a certain number of countries agree on kind of the standards of what needs to be done, right?
Exactly, yeah.
And we have, although accidents and incidents seem to have happened, since World War II, it hasn't seemed to gotten to the same level as it once did. Of course, that could just be a fluke, you know. Where it hasn't been that long since the wars. Certainly, there's more history to happen, and time will tell whether the current arrangements we have will even hold, right? So, like, obviously, the breaking up of the EU and some other stuff has been happening internationally and stuff, and those have an effect.
Well, but that's independence and such thing are nothing compared to genocide or slavery, you know. If you look at Myanmar,
that's true.
Burma.
Yeah, and you know, like, but we also still have countries today that run independently, that aren't being held to the same like international standards and stuff, like North Korea and like Burma and other places, who are suffering from those human rights abuses.
The problem is we don't enforce the human rights there, and we don't do it even in the United States. You don't accept the European courts, and you cannot be sued for violation of human rights because you don't accept the Charta, which the European nations do. Yeah. And I'm from Switzerland. We're not even in the European Union, but we also agree that international law is the highest, and you cannot violate human rights here, no matter what the national autonomy says.
Yeah, because the EU thing, I mean, that, yeah, it's not necessarily a human rights there's some arguments that say it could be because of like the way that migration works between countries and stuff, but it is more economic than it is necessarily on the human rights level of things. Like when I think of human rights violations, I'm thinking of, like genocides and stuff like
torture, waterboarding.
Yeah, things that are happening and stuff. And yeah, you're right. Even the United States also participates in some of that if we're looking at like Guantanamo Bay and stuff like that too. So
yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
that's, for me, is unjust. We should fight against torture. We should fight against genocide and slavery in every nation, independent whatever they think and voted for. That's my point.
And you think the best way to do that is by having nations agree to like an international, standard, right?
NATO.
Yeah.
Have an international standard, a minimal standard which we all want to grant everybody, and then a real army to enforce it and real mechanisms for every nation.
So like a separate army that like the UN, like a separate force or like country.
It must be independent.
Because
if the government of one nation turns against the human rights, the other nations must be able to intervene. So this balance of powers must always be.
But what do you think of, because, we do have, the UN does function and it does have member states who vote on these kinds of issues on whether or not countries are in violations of some stuff. And I'm trying to think of, like China and Russia are also on the board of like human rights violations when it comes to like stuff in North Korea. Or I'm also trying to think of like stuff with Saudi Arabia and stuff like that hasn't been addressed because of certain member states having interests in the, what goes on in Saudi Arabia and stuff. Do you think that's, again, like, is that a flaw of the current system? Is that a flaw because of some other factors, or like, do you have explanation?
Yeah, the flaw is it's not binding. It's not obligatory to respect the human rights. And Saudi Arabia, USA, and nations like that don't respect it.
Yeah, so it comes down to obligation for you, is what you're saying. Like it has to be.
We should enforce it on everybody.
Okay.
Like this,
Okay.
And every philosopher tells you, no, there is this is-ought problem. You can't say you should intervene. You can't say you should violate their autonomy. Because if you're going, that's the other part of law philosophy, which is law positivism, is that everything is just made up. There is no absolute standard. And you have to get an absolute standard to compare everything for justice. Otherwise, you cannot say civil disobedience is okay. You have no right to civil disobedience if every law, which is formally okay, is just. So basically, you need those quasi-objective standards.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'll let David talk after this because Lord knows I've been talking. But even if there is the is-ought thing, I think even if philosophy doesn't provide the answer to things, which I think it does sometimes, but humans are going to make that should anyway, right? Like even if it's not the most philosophically correct thing ever, like humans are going to do what they're going to do, right? They're going to protect themselves. They're going to strive for that independence and autonomy when they can, and have better control over their own lives. It seems to be the natural path that humans take. I think I'm in agreement with you in that our laws should be reflective of that. Our laws should probably be in protection of human rights violations probably more strongly than they are now. I don't. I like what you're putting out here, Theo. I don't have any other thoughts. David, do you have anything on this?
I wanted to quickly clarify something from about 4 years ago when it wasn't actually, it was about 10 minutes ago, but I think we said Kosovo and I think we meant Catalonia, because Catalonia is the breakaway from Barcelona from Spain.
Yes.
Kosovo is a breakaway from, I think it's Switzerland.
Well, both, really. I think.
Serbia.
But yeah. Or
Well,
Serbia, I apologize, yeah.
Well, both situations apply as far as like autonomy. That I think was the general theme, right?
Yeah.
Like we could say the same thing about like Kurdistan or something,
No, that's basically the right for self-determination. But then there's also right for life, right for non-discrimination, all that stuff. So you can have multiple human rights violated, which should be enforced. And I think we have to fight to enforce them. Many people think, no, you don't have a right, you don't have a should to violate anybody's autonomy. And I think that's unethical and dangerous.
It's a constant. It's a constant back and forth as to how to implement this in reality. Because we completely agree with the theory, but when we come across these sorts of issues, it's often, particularly if I frame it within the realm of Brexit, there's a fight between working together internationally and self-determination. And so, as much as I am remain voter pro-European, I haven't changed my opinion on that. It's how do we go about convincing certain people that still, even before we get into European politics, they feel so distanced from their own government, and then an extra layer of bureaucracy is now above that. What do we do for those people to convince them that actually this is the desirable path forward?
Good question.
How do we convince people who are not convinced that human rights are higher priority than, say, national autonomy?
Yeah. So particularly on a very specific note, given the recent EU elections and the even more recent last night's, we had a by-election, which means a member of our parliament had to stand down on criminal charges, and there was another vote to see who could represent that 650th of the country, and each area gets their own representative in Parliament, including our Prime Minister, who recently resigned yesterday as well. The Brexit Party, who, as far as I am aware, they have one policy, and it's Nigel Farage's party, and that is just leave, no deal, which is, to put it politely, I think that's wrong, but they got the largest percent of vote. They got something like 34% of the EU election vote. These are people that just want go now. They don't want to have this conversation. They've already heard the arguments. They claim to know what they voted for, and let's say, for argument's sake, they do know what they're voting for.
Why don't you let them? I mean, that's not against any humanitarian international law, so I think every independence should be granted. Only if they start to think, hey, we should genocide those or we should enslave those, then you have a problem and we have to intervene. But I think it's basically those human rights are inalienable, so that means you don't vote on them and you cannot dispense of them. We just granted everybody, even Saudi Arabians and American citizens, basically would have to obey those, or we would feel justified to intervene. So it's like the highest standard we enforce on everybody to grant everybody the maximal liberty.
Sure.
And I think the human rights aren't enough yet. You said you were born in the USA and you didn't choose it, and that's totally right. If you had the human right for, say, free person traffic on the whole world, you could choose to leave the USA and choose another country or self-determination, make your own country, and be really free, which is not the case right now. And those autonomy things are conflicting with national law. National law says, no, we don't split up Catalonia or Kosovo. That's not even possible to vote on. But that's a human right law, which is higher priority by most law philosophers. So we should grant them the right to independence, and we should grant the right to free person traffic, that you can live everywhere you want on Earth, in my opinion.
Well, this is a topic that we never really talked about here before, and I'm glad we got to talk about it with you, Theo. You give me some stuff to think about as far as the prioritization of human rights above all other kinds of things to prioritize, and like how that plays out on the international scale. I'd love to talk to you about this again, Theo. This has been a great call. Thanks again.
Awesome. Thanks, guys. I'm a big fan of you all. Anthony, Dan, Matt, ACA, whole thing.
Yeah. Matt's here He's playing Keyforge. I can see him. It's pretty cool. Anyway,
can I quickly interject as well? Theo, a couple of things. The Nations League finals are going on at the minute. Do you have a score prediction for Sunday?
No.
Are you aware of the football? It's England, Switzerland. We're playing out a third place.
Oh yeah. Tough one. We never made it so far in any tournament, so whatever.
I thought it was highly suspicious how you
Hold on.
It was highly suspicious how
we were both happy.
This is an American show here, okay? We can't be having your fancy European sports nonsense on here. Get out of here.
Okay, in that case, America are probably going to win the Women's World Cup, which just started today as well.
That's cool. So you would know more about that than I would. But Theo, thanks again for being on, and I look forward to hearing from you again.
Guys.
Yeah.
Sure.
Thanks, Theo.
Good stuff. Yeah, that's the intersection of okay, so a lot of times we talk about, you know what I think of? This reminds me of the conversation we have about when is it the right time to talk to somebody about religion and their political beliefs and stuff. Well, mostly religion, right? Because in some way a religion kind of benefits people, even if it can be shown to be false in some sort of way, some sort of religious belief. And if you're tearing that down for somebody, that can cause harm in some ways, right? And it's at what point do we? I mean, you could stretch that into saying that's violating some sort of autonomy in some way, maybe. Especially there's cultural groups and stuff. I was thinking of that guy who went to some remote tribe off I think it was off the coast of India earlier this year, I think it was, and he was trying to evangelize to them, right? Even though it was super illegal to go there, and he couldn't do that. That would be some would call that a violation of this kind of culture, and I mean, it definitely a violation of the national laws there, right? Because he wasn't allowed to go there, but we're kind of protecting these people and protecting their way of life, even though it is different from ours, and in some ways we wouldn't encourage in our own society, right?
That specific example is fascinating. I don't know how true the actual framing of the conversation was. It's sort of, that bit in The Hobbit, that meme where he's off on an adventure. He's like, yeah, let's go on an adventure. It was sort of it was framed like that. This guy was just taking a boat, and he was like, yeah, let's spread religion. And it probably wasn't like that.
No, it was a really interesting story. I won't get into it here, but if you hadn't heard of that, definitely look that. I can't remember the guy's name, but a guy was a evangelist going to it. He was just set on converting the world, and he was like, here's one of the only untouched people groups on Earth. Let's go do it. Let's go convert him. And then he died because they shot arrows at him, I think, and killed him.
Yeah, I think
previous
people that went to that particular island went there in they had some form of iron on them, and they kick-started their Iron Age because they had rocked up and they'd been killed or whatever, and they scavenged the boat or something. It's bizarre.
Yeah.
It's like the whole idea of going back in time to like give somebody a technology from today, like giving someone an iPhone 200 years ago. What would have happened?
Right. Well, yeah, people say that, but then it's also like, well, it wouldn't have cell phone service and you wouldn't be able to charge it. So it wouldn't do too much too fast. I guess if
You know what I mean.
Yeah, I know. But
An
that's
egg
one,
whisk.
there's a picture really need to go on, but there is a picture like from a few years ago of like a woman who appears to be holding like a cell phone in her hands, and it was like from like the 1920s or something, when really it was just some sort of like hearing aid device from back then that they don't really use now. And people are like, oh, she's a time traveler, she has a cell phone. It's like, well, there wouldn't be any cell phone towers. Like, who is she going to be calling? Like, unless it's like it's an interdimensional traveling communication device, but I don't know.